Good morning. Imagine a scenario where taking out an enemy's entire top leadership doesn't paralyze their military, but actually triggers an automatic, devastating retaliation.
It is quite the scenario to consider.
Welcome to today's deep dive into current events in the Middle East and the United States. I will be your guide as we calmly map the local, national, and international impacts of this ongoing conflict.
Right, and we'll be looking at the primary patterns over the past 2 weeks.
Precisely. We aim to provide you with a clear, objective analysis, delivering the facts and varying perspectives without bias, and, crucially, without generating fear.
Just the facts on the ground.
Now, before we begin our analysis, this deep dive is brought to you by ProWave AI and generated by Stylo News, which is the AI-powered news application.
A very timely tool for all of this.
Indeed. To celebrate their one-year anniversary, ProWave AI is offering a March special discount. You can use the discount code STYLO at www.stylonews.com.
I believe that's just for the early birds, right?
Correct. It is valid until the end of March for the first 250 subscribers.
Good to know.
Let us establish today's metadata. Title: Iran under pressure. Regional war risks and strategic outlook. Region: Middle East, specifically focusing on Iran. Date: 26 March 2026.
Right in the middle of a very tense timeline.
Yes, it is. Our mission today is to objectively lay out the facts. We will be drawing entirely on intelligence aggregated through the Stylo News app.
Which is really powerful because it pulls from everywhere.
It does. For context, Stylo News is the consumer version of Stylo Intel Aux. That is a robust software tool originally designed for enterprise operations across government, military, and global business sectors.
So listeners are getting access to the same dashboard used by actual policymakers.
Exactly. By using this tool, you get unique access to the exact same sentiment analysis, open source intelligence, and geopolitical tracking used by global decision makers to navigate these exact crises. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, to really understand the sheer scale of the kinetic reality on the ground today, we have to trace this back to the inciting incidents in late February 2026. Because we are not just looking at a sudden random flare-up here. This is a sustained, methodical escalation. And it fundamentally shifted when joint U.S.-Israeli strikes resulted in the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Right, and that single event naturally triggered a massive shift in Tehran. You immediately saw the appointment of a new hardline leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Mojtaba Khamenei.
Yes, and his first move was significant.
He stepped in and categorically rejected any ceasefire conditions until a decisive victory was achieved.
Exactly, but the strikes didn't end there.
No, they accelerated.
They did. The intelligence reports detail a highly systematic decapitation campaign against key Iranian figures. In rapid succession, we saw the targeted killings of Ali Larijani, the Supreme National Security Council Secretary.
Wow.
Yeah. And then Gholam Reza Soleimani, the head of the Basij militia, plus Ali Mohammed Naini, the spokesperson for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
They just swept the board.
They effectively wiped out the highest echelons of the IRGC and the national security apparatus in one sweep.
Wait, I need to stop you there, because this is the part that, defies conventional logic to me.
How so?
Losing your supreme leader, your top security coordinator, and key generals in a matter of days. I mean, that would paralyze any normal nation's military.
Oh, completely. The chain of command would be shattered.
Right. So how is it possible that Iran immediately responded with what they are calling Operation True Promise 4?
It's a massive operation.
The scale is staggering. We are looking at reports of over 700 missiles and 3,600 drones fired at U.S. bases in the UAE and Kuwait, as well as targets across Israel.
Yeah.
How do you pull off a coordinated strike of that magnitude with basically no leadership?
What's fascinating here is how Iran's decentralized IRGC command structure was specifically built to absorb these massive leadership losses.
Without collapsing.
Without suffering an operational collapse at all. They utilize a strategy known as mosaic defense. Open source intelligence monitors tracking the high volume of missile impacts on social media are seeing this doctrine in action right now.
So how does a mosaic defense actually work in practice?
Basically, mosaic defense relies on deeply entrenched autonomous regional commands rather than a rigid top-down hierarchy.
So if Tehran goes dark, the local commanders already know what to do.
Exactly. They don't need a phone call from headquarters to launch.
Wow.
They have pre-delegated authority and pre-positioned stockpiles. This allows them to sustain continuous fire. and it's highly effective.
Because they're using older tech, right?
Yeah, by swarming older reserve models of drones and missiles, they overwhelmed air defenses. The reports indicate severe damage to Israel's Iron Dome system.
And didn't they hit a jet?
According to Iranian claims, they even managed to shoot down an Israeli F-16 fighter jet over central Iran.
You know, if we view a traditional military command like a pyramid, this mosaic defense operates more like a hydra.
That's a great way to look at it.
Taking out the top of a pyramid crumbles the whole structure. But cutting off a hydra's head just triggers the autonomous bodies to strike back automatically. Does this decentralized structure make traditional decapitation strikes completely ineffective in halting immediate retaliatory capabilities?
It fundamentally changes the calculus. I mean, you can't just bomb a central command center and expect the missiles to stop flying.
Right.
It forces the opposing military to shift their strategy. If you can't kill the Hydra by targeting the individuals at the top, you have to target the broader infrastructure that sustains those autonomous units.
You have to starve the beast.
Exactly. Starve the beast.
Which brings us to a massive shift in the conflict. We are seeing the battlefield move away from purely military targets, like bases and airfields, directly into critical regional infrastructure.
Yeah, it's becoming an economic war.
Exactly. We are talking about the economic weaponization of this conflict. If you can't stop the military directly, you break the economy funding it.
Yes, and the primary focal point of that strategy is the Strait of Hormuz.
A huge choke point.
Iran has effectively closed this vital transit route. To put that in perspective for you, roughly 20 to 25% of the entire globe's seaborne oil passes through that narrow waterway.
That is a massive chunk of global energy.
It is. Iran is using heavily fortified bases on Qeshm Island, operating asymmetric naval tactics to enforce this closure.
Explain that asymmetric tactic for a second. Because, the U.S. has massive aircraft carriers and destroyers in the region. How does Iran shut down a strait against that kind of firepower?
Through cost exchange asymmetry, they aren't using billion-dollar destroyers.
Right.
They're using mini-submarines, swarms of missile-armed speedboats, and explosive drone boats.
Which are incredibly cheap to make.
Exactly. A $10,000 explosive drone boat can critically damage a $100 million tanker or naval vessel. It makes the strait simply too risky for commercial shipping to navigate.
And both sides are actively targeting the other's economic lifelines now.
Oh, absolutely.
The U.S. and Israel struck Iran's South Pars gas field, which is a massive offshore energy reservoir critical to Iran's revenue.
A huge hit.
And in retaliation, Iran struck Israel's Haifa oil refinery. That facility processes over half of Israel's fuel needs, and the strike caused a massive citywide blackout.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the strategic logic becomes intensely clear. Both sides are attempting to inflict maximum economic pain to force a political concession.
Basically a staring contest.
Yeah. Iran is specifically leveraging the world's reliance on Middle Eastern energy to pressure U.S. allies in the Gulf. We are seeing widespread concern across the Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, states.
The vulnerability of these GCC states is just jumping off the page in the intelligence reports.
It really is.
The UAE has been intercepting ballistic missiles and drones aimed directly at their territory. And when you look at the social media sentiment across the region, there is massive civilian anxiety.
Understandably so.
People aren't just worried about military bases. They are terrified about the vulnerability of vital desalination plants and power grids. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
In a region where everyone's economy relies on highly exposed, fixed infrastructure like coastal refineries and desalination plants, isn't everyone essentially throwing stones inside a glass house?
That is precisely the danger, and glass house is the perfect term for it. I mean, a modern desalination plant is a massive, fragile piece of coastal infrastructure.
You can't just hide it.
Right. It cannot easily be moved or buried in a bunker. If those go offline in a place like Dubai or Abu Dhabi, you aren't just looking at economic disruption.
What are we looking at?
You are looking at a ticking clock on a humanitarian crisis regarding basic drinking water. They have days, not weeks, of water reserves.
Wow. Days.
Iran knows this, and they are using that shared vulnerability as leverage.
And the ripple effects are hitting the listener's wallet directly. Globally, we're seeing oil prices nearing $100 a barrel.
Which is painful at the pump.
Very. And that sparks intense fears of stagflation, high inflation, combined with a stagnant economy. If you're wondering how a conflict thousands of miles away matters to your daily life, look at the gas pump tomorrow.
It's unavoidable.
Because the economic stakes are so incredibly high, international actors are being forced into unprecedented diplomatic stances. Traditional alliances are fracturing in real time.
The European Union's response is perhaps the most glaring example of this fracture.
It was pretty surprising.
It was. President Trump officially called for European allies to join a U.S. naval mission to secure the Strait of Hormuz and protect global shipping. But the EU collectively refused.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and EU High Representative Kaja Kallas were very explicit about this refusal, weren't they?
Very explicit, yeah.
They emphasized European strategic autonomy. They stated that Europe needs to focus on its own defense against Russian threats rather than getting pulled into what they view as a U.S.-initiated conflict in the Middle East. But what does that actually mean under the surface?
It means their economy is already reeling from the energy shocks of the war in Ukraine.
They can't take another hit.
They simply cannot afford to absorb another massive energy crisis by entering a shooting war in the Middle East. This raises an important question about the long-term viability of post-WWII defense pacts.
Because economic survival is taking priority.
Exactly. Economic survival and localized security interests are beginning to completely override historical alliance loyalties.
And it's not just the West fracturing. We saw a highly unusual diplomatic move where Hamas publicly urged Iran to refrain from targeting neighboring Gulf countries.
That was wild to see.
That stood out to me as incredibly bizarre. Hamas is traditionally a core proxy aligned with Iran, relying on them for military backing. Why would they publicly push back against their primary sponsor?
Because of where their political leadership lives. Hamas is under intense pressure from Qatar, who hosts their leadership and provides massive financial backing. Qatar is terrified of a regional war dragging the Gulf states into the crossfire.
So they basically forced Hamas's hand.
They forced Hamas to condemn the strikes on Gulf territory. It perfectly illustrates the limits of proxy loyalty when financial and geographic realities set in.
It really does. Furthermore, the U.S. Treasury has actually eased sanctions on Iranian and Russian oil exports.
Yeah, think about that.
Let that sink in for a second. The U.S. is easing sanctions on the very country they are currently engaged in intense military operations against.
It sounds contradictory.
And they're doing it just to stabilize global markets and help Asian allies like Japan and South Korea manage the severe energy crisis caused by the conflict.
The global chessboard is incredibly complex right now.
It's a mess.
Meanwhile, the UK is cautiously offering military bases, but explicitly holding back naval deployments. Turkey's foreign minister is projecting weeks of continued, grueling conflict.
And Russia.
Russia is capitalizing on all of these Western divisions, deepening its military and economic ties with Iran, while the U.S. is distracted.
We are watching a high-stakes poker game where longtime allies like the EU are folding their hands and proxies like Hamas are asking to cash out. Are we witnessing a temporary disagreement driven by panic or a permanent realignment of global alliances?
The intelligence sentiment strongly suggests it might be a permanent recalibration.
Really?
Yeah, when nations are forced to choose between a historic military alliance and their own immediate economic or energy survival, self-interest usually wins. Russia and China are closely monitoring these exact fractures to see just how fragile Western solidarity really is when the oil stops flowing.
This international reluctance to engage directly puts an immense amount of pressure back on the domestic fronts of the primary actors.
It isolates them.
The U.S. and Iran are essentially standing alone, and it has culminated in a very strict high-stakes timeline.
We have to look at the financial toll on the United States. According to the defense reports, the current military campaign is costing over $1.3 million per minute.
Wait, $1.3 million a minute?
Per minute, with total expense projections nearing $1 trillion.
That is just an unfathomable burn rate. At that pace, you aren't just fighting a war, you are bankrupting a country.
And that financial burden is inevitably driving severe domestic unrest.
The protests.
We are tracking organized No Kings protests planned in New York City and New Jersey, specifically protesting the Trump administration's unilateral military policies.
Yes, and the administration's response to these protests has been incredibly firm.
Very firm.
They have launched federal investigations into the funding networks behind Antifa and other groups they associate with leftist political violence. To project a narrative of patriotism and historical order, the administration even symbolically reinstated a Christopher Columbus statue at the White House.
Which creates vastly conflicting narratives between what is happening at home and what is happening abroad.
Two completely different stories.
On one hand, President Trump has declared a decisive victory over Iran, stating from the podium that their leadership is destroyed, and has publicly identified the radical left as a primary adversary at home.
And on the other hand,
Iranian officials explicitly deny that any negotiations are taking place. They point to the closed Strait of Hormuz and claim that the U.S. is actually the one retreating.
which leads us to the most critical event the listener needs to watch for in the immediate future. President Trump has issued a 48-hour ultimatum.
A very narrow window.
Iran must reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or the U.S. military will completely obliterate Iranian power plants.
And Iran's response was just as severe.
Iran's counter-threat was immediate and devastating. They threatened to destroy Gulf water and energy infrastructure if struck. So what does this all mean?
It's the ultimate brinkmanship.
There is a massive disconnect here. You have the declaration of victory on the podium, but you have a ticking 48-hour clock on the battlefield threatening regional annihilation. For the listener watching this unfold on the news tonight, which indicator is the most reliable measure of reality?
Watch the shipping lanes and the price of oil.
Not the speeches.
You have to ignore the rhetoric. Rhetoric, from podiums in Washington and Tehran, is strictly designed for domestic consumption and political survival. It is theater.
Okay.
But physical oil tankers moving safely through the Strait of Hormuz and the global financial market's reaction to that movement, that cannot be faked.
It's tangible.
That metric alone will tell you whether the 48-hour ultimatum led to a quiet, back-channel concession driven by mutual economic exhaustion or a catastrophic escalation targeting civilian survival infrastructure.
To track those physical indicators and cut through the political rhetoric yourself, remember that the intelligence we discussed today was aggregated using Stylo News.
Highly recommend it.
It is a highly powerful mobile and computer app that you can download to customize your own personal intelligence-style briefs. It pulls data from hundreds of traditional news sources and X, giving you the full spectrum of global sentiment. You can subscribe for AI-powered news on demand at www.stylonews.com.
It really cuts through the noise.
And stepping out of the anchor chair for a moment, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a heavy one.
We know this is a complex, heavy topic with a lot of moving parts, but understanding the actual mechanisms behind the headlines, the how and the why, is exactly why we do this show.
Absolutely.
We would love to hear what topics you want us to tackle next, so please reach out, drop us a comment, and follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to consider.
What's that?
We've talked extensively about the immediate kinetic strikes and the economic warfare happening in the Gulf right now. But with actors like Russia and China closely observing these newly exposed vulnerabilities, could the true long-term threat of this two-week escalation be the blueprint it has just provided to the world?
Oh, wow.
A blueprint showing exactly how easily a few well-placed, relatively cheap asymmetric strikes on economic choke points and glasshouse infrastructure can paralyze the entire global economy.